Okay, now I'm going to show you how to underglaze your work. And so underglazes come in a variety of brands. So we've got your Amaco Velvet Underglaze, and we've got here Mayco Stroke and Coat. These are actually Wonderglazes. They're not a traditional underglaze. And so what is an underglaze, you ask? Well, underglaze is called underglaze because it is a material that goes underneath a glaze. And so you can paint it onto your bisqueware or your greenware, and then you put clear glaze over the top of it. So back in the old days, we didn't have underglaze. All you had was slip that you made yourself. And so you could colorize your slip, make it lots of different colors, but you would have to put it onto your greenware. You couldn't put it on work that's already been fired. And so the downside with that is that your greenware is super fragile and it's really easy to break. So the next advancement in technology after slips were underglazes. And so basically underglazes are kind of a step in between glaze and slip. And so the great thing about underglaze is we can paint it on greenware or we can paint it on bisqueware. There are a lot of different brands out there, so you really need to read the directions on them. So for example, shake and stir well before using. For solid coverage, apply 3 even coats to greenware or bisque. So this is important. This can be applied to greenware or bisqueware. The thing that makes underglaze amazing is that when you paint it on, it doesn't run. And so that's why I say underglaze is more similar to slip than it is a glaze, because it has a matte surface. So it's like slip in that way, and it doesn't run. So it's like slip in that way. Glaze, the glossier it is, tends to have a little bit of run to it. And so if you want a nice tight pattern, underglazes are the way to go. So this says apply 3 coats, and then after you do this, you add clear glaze over the top of it. Again, it's called underglaze because it goes underneath the glaze. So this is Wonderglaze. It is not a traditional underglaze, and so when you put 3 coats of this on, you do not have to put the clear glaze on the top of it. That's because this is glossy. And so this is sort of a step in between underglaze and glaze. And this is actually much more closer to the glaze side. So the great thing about these stroke and coats is that they really don't run. They're pretty solid, but they have a glossy surface. And that's why I say they're closer to glaze, because they have a glossy surface. And so always a good idea to read the instructions. Shake well, apply 1 coat for translucent color or 2 more for opaque coverage. Let dry. If ware is completely glazed, no clear glaze is required. So again, this is telling you this is a Wonderglaze. It's kind of like underglaze, it's not, and you do not need to put clear glaze on top of it. This is standalone. There are a lot of brands out there. My favorite brand is the Duncan Easy. I don't have that in front of me right now, so I will show you how to. These all work the same. If you're going to use underglaze, the velvets, I would stick to the velvets. You can mix and match, but if you're going to blend colors at all, things might get a little strange if you blend colors between the two. But experiment. They might work for you. So test tiles are super duper important. You always want to do a test tile. And a lot of people say, I don't need to do a test tile. I know what I'm doing. But I'm here to tell you, test tiles are super important. You spend a whole lot of time making whatever it is you want to make. And so you want to practice first on a test tile so that you mess up on a test tile and not on your actual piece. So I have lots of experience, obviously, working with underglaze and clay and everything. And at one point I was making animals, and I was underglazing and glazing their eyes, and I thought to myself, oh, I'm really good at this. I don't need to practice. I know what I'm doing. I've done it lots and lots of times. It's no big deal. I might be a little rusty. And then I thought, well, I actually am a little rusty. So let me just experiment on a test tile first to make sure I know what I'm doing. So I did. And here you have it. That's an eyeball, and it's horrible. And so I was really glad I screwed up on my test tile and not on my actual piece. So then, and it only takes a day, not very long. So I thought, okay, let me practice one more time before I go to my piece. And so this was my next eyeball. That's a lot better, just to show you how horrible that is. And so that one's decent. I'm kind of okay with that. And so I thought, well, let me practice one more time to really get it a little bit more dialed in. So that was my last practice. So after that, I thought, yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. So even if you're very experienced, I still do test tiles. It's going to save you a lot of heartache down the road. So basically, the way Underglaze works, you can draw on your pattern, whatever you want to do. You can even do some sort of stenciling if you want. I like this blue painter's tape. Works really well. You can make all sorts of shapes, obviously. So we'll do one like that, just to show you. And then we also have this other tape, which is amazing. It is the automotive tape. That's what they use for doing flame jobs and stuff on your pickup or whatever you got. And this stuff is amazing. So the great thing about this is you can really make it bend around and do all sorts of really cool shapes. So it also comes in different thicknesses, this tape. Okay, I did a slightly better job there. So you can see right here I have different thicknesses. So I'm going to take a minute and really push that down. Push down my edges so that I have less bleeding. I don't know if you can see this, but this clay is really textured. And so there's going to be bleeding because there is that canvas texture on there. If I didn't want any bleeding, it would need to be nice and smooth. Okay, the way Underglazes work is I always like to get my paintbrush a little bit wet. And then I'm just going to go for it. So, you know, you can see I drew on this pattern with a pencil. The pencil lead will just burn out. So the pencil lead is not a big deal. Oh wow, this is brand new. I feel bad using it. So I drew my pattern on, and so as the direction said, it said 3 coats for opaque coverage. And since I'm sort of doing a tight pattern, I want opaque coverage. So I'm going to do 3 coats. Generally, you want your brush strokes to go in 3 different directions. So, for example, on the circle, I painted it on this direction as much as possible. My second coat, I'm going to paint on this direction. And then my third coat, I'll paint on a different direction, this direction. So, 1 coat, this. So, we'll say 1 coat this way, second coat this way, third coat, I'm going to paint diagonally. And so the reason that you want to paint your brush strokes on 3 different directions is that way it's sort of inconsistent. Your brush strokes are inconsistent. If I painted all 3 of my brush strokes on this direction, I would have a linear patchwork that's happening. So if I paint 3 different directions, if my coverage isn't great, I'm going to have more of a mottled sort of surface. If you are really good with your coverage and you paint all three coats on this way, you should be okay, but honestly that's really hard to do. It's hard to get that good coverage, and your brush strokes are really easy to always see. And so if you paint your different coats on 3 different directions, you're going to be more successful. Obviously this line is really thin, so it's hard to paint 3 different directions, and there's not a lot of space to see brush strokes anyway, and so I'm not going to worry about that part very much. So I'm just going to go for it again. So one thing that is also very important when you do this is that you wait for it to dry completely. And so I could have waited for that to dry a little bit more, but the most important thing is that it's not really wet. So if you try to paint your second or third coat on top of really wet underglaze, you're not really adding another layer to it. You're just mushing your underglazes around. And so it's really important to let them dry in between so that you add another layer on top. And so one thing you'll also notice is I don't double over. Like, I'm not going back over this to make sure I have good coverage, because the minute I do, I'm going to start wiping away the glaze. And so that's also why it's important that you let them dry in between layers, because when you paint your next coat on, you do not want to disturb this under layer, that first layer, because if you disturb it, you're likely to pull it off, and then you don't have your 3 coats. So ideally, you'll let it turn all the way dry to where it's chalky. So you can see right there, it's starting to turn chalky. Here it's still really dark. It's a little bit moist, but at least it's not super wet. So one thing that's also great about painting your different coats in different directions is you can still see your materials. Even after it's dry, there'll be a little bit of texture. And so the difficult part is when you're painting your vessel, let's pretend this is your vessel, it's hard to know if you did polka dots. It's sort of hard to remember which has 1 coat, which has 2 coats, which has 3 coats. Obviously the first coat's easy, you can see. But once you start painting the second coat, it's really hard to tell the second from the third. But if you're consistent with your brush strokes, you know, oh, my first coat I did downwards, and so my second coat I did horizontally. And so it's easier to see, oh, this one, the brush strokes are vertically, so I know I only have 1 coat on it. So that is also helpful. But really the primary reason you paint your brush strokes in 3 different directions is so that you don't see your brush strokes. You're much less likely to see your brush strokes if you paint them in different directions. So this one, I'm going to try and paint in a different direction. So again, I have a pretty light touch with my paintbrush here. I'm really trying not to disturb the material underneath it. And I'm also trying to be careful not to double back over what I just did. And so this is what I mean, how you'll see your brush strokes is I can see there'll be some sort of texture. I hope you can if that picks that up, I'm not sure. But there will be actual physical texture, and you will be able to see your brush strokes. And then hopefully, once it's fired, you won't be able to see them at all. So that's 2 coats. I'm going to do my 3rd coat here. So you generally never want to do more than 3 coats. If you do more than 3 coats of your underglaze, it's going to shiver off. And basically what that means is it'll pop right off. I actually have an example I'll show you in just a second. Your underglaze also has the potential to shiver off if your bisqueware is dirty. So you always want to make sure your bisqueware is clean so that it doesn't shiver off. So you might think, oh, underglaze is painful, I have to do 3 coats, that's a real drag. Well, I'm here to tell you, if you're painting with any sort of paint, you're going to do 3 coats of it anyway, because it's going to look horrible if you only do 1 coat. Okay, so this is a really good example of underglaze that is shivered off. So either she got it on too thick there, or her bisqueware was dirty. So you want to make sure your bisqueware is clean so you don't have your underglaze shivering off. So I wasn't paying super close attention to the directions I was going. I'm hoping I'm going in a different direction. So because I want this out, a lot of times what I should have done is outlined it first so that I have a nice clean line here. Okay, so that's my 3rd coat. So now when I paint the other color, I just have to be very careful and really butt up tightly against that color. What beginners tend to usually do is not get up tight enough. You can even overlap it a little bit, but beginners tend not to get close enough, and then they have these white sort of halos where colors touch. So do your best to butt up right to the very edge so you don't have that beginner mistake. I'm going to do one more thing here. Okay, drawing straight lines can be difficult, and one little tip or trick is to start a little bit behind where the two pieces meet up, and then just slowly ease your way into the edge of that line. That's the easiest way to make a straight line. So as I start, I'm going to start down low, and then I'll ease my way into the actual line. So because I'm outlining this, I am still going in the same direction. There is a certain amount of that you simply can't avoid. So now I'm doing my brush strokes the opposite direction. That's my second coat. Now just one more coat. Make sure it's nice and dry. And now my third coat. Again, make sure you have a nice light touch and that it's thoroughly dry so that you are not disrupting the material underneath. Okay, and now one more different direction. Okay. So, like I said, because there's this texture here, you're always going to have that leakage. I forgot to really push it down with this tool. This one I did a much better job of pushing it down, and I still have some leakage. That's bad. You can always clean up your leakage by scraping it away. When you scrape it away with a metal tool, it'll leave a mark. The metal will leave a mark, but the metal will also fire off. So you can do something like that. You can also take a clean paintbrush and scrub that off. So now if I wanted, I could leave this line white, and then I can clear glaze over this whole thing, and that way I have black and purple and white, and everything will be glossy when I add the gloss glaze. Or if I wanted to, I could make this a different color. So if I wanted to make this a different color, I would probably really want to try and clean that up a little bit better. Because whatever color I put on here is going to be lighter than black, and it might show through, and so you have to kind of be careful about what you're doing. But as you can see, it cleans up pretty well. So then if I wanted to, I could add the purple over the top of that. This is a fairly pale purple. If it were a dark purple, I would feel pretty confident that this would cover. I actually think though, if you put your 3 coats on it, you have a pretty good chance of it covering that black anyway. So again, I mentioned having a light touch. One thing that I'm not doing, so I'm brushing like this. I'm not pushing the paint or the material. I'm not pushing the bristles into the ferrule. That's the ferrule of the brush. I have a really light touch. I'm not doing this, so you do not want to do that. So that's my first coat. Let me do my second coat. So obviously I should let it dry a little bit more so that I have better coverage. So the goal is to have 3 coats on everything. So I have 3 coats here, 3 coats here, 3 coats here, and ideally 3 coats here. You can get away with little sort of breaking the rules here and there if you're doing it minimally. So I can load up my paintbrush fairly thickly here, And I can do dots of black slip here that are really thick, you know, maybe the equivalent of 3 coats. But because it's in such a small area, it's likely not to shiver off. So you can get away with little things like that. I just wanted to make that a little bit bigger. Yeah, and so I don't have to go over these dots 3 times. That'll be good. So let me do my final coat. So again, because this is underglaze, I have to put a clear glaze over the top. And actually what I'll do is I'll do a clear glaze over half of this and no glaze over the other half. So maybe I'll do it this way, I don't know. So you can see the difference. You do not have to put clear glaze on the top of this. If you want a matte surface, you can leave it as it is and you'll have a matte surface. They tend to look a little bit chalky. I think they look more chalky than they do velvety. So if I choose not to put clear glaze over the top of it and just fire it like this, then when it comes out of the kiln, I usually put a coat of acrylic polyurethane. You can just get it at Home Depot. And so that way, if you just put one clear coat of polyurethane over it, it protects the surface and keeps it from getting dirty. And then also it makes it moist. It makes it look moist so that it doesn't look dry and chalky. So I am a big fan of the polyurethane on top of Underglaze, because the downside that I personally don't like when I'm glazing my animals, I don't want them to look like glass. I want them to look lifelike. And so oftentimes I will use Underglaze and not put a clear coat over the top of it. And then after it comes out of the kiln, then I put one coat of polyurethane on it, and they look really good. So I will put a coat of clear glaze on this, but I'm going to let it dry more first. So that's basically one technique if you want a nice tight pattern. Okay, now it's time to glaze this piece now that it is thoroughly dry. You can always read the directions. Mix well, 2 to 3 coats is all you need. So you want to have a really light touch with this so you don't smear your underglaze. You also want to make sure that your paintbrush is clean, and do your best not to double back over anything. Once you've got your first coat on there, you've got a pretty good seal. I don't know how good of a job there, but your first coat is the most crucial, and so it's absolutely imperative to make sure it dries. Okay, now that it's dry, you can see that I actually got really good coverage on here. There's just a couple little spots I missed, like right there. So I know I've sealed it off pretty well. I'm still going to be really careful with my next coat. But like I said, it's absolutely imperative that your first coat of glaze is thoroughly dry. Otherwise, you're going to smear it all around. So here goes my second coat, different direction. Still a very light touch. And still doing my best not to double back. There was a little bit of double backing. Okay, second coat. This glaze is pretty darn thin. It looks like someone thinned it out, so I'm going to do 3 coats of this. But I need to make sure it's thoroughly dry before I do my third coat. Okay, so you can see this is still a teeny tiny little bit wet there, but I think it's dry enough. I'll be fine. I'm going to do my third and final coat, which this one's the easiest one of all because I have such a good seal on everything. I'm not so worried about smearing anything now. All right, and that's it. That's all there is to it. Okay. Okay, so here's the test tile after I fired it in the kiln. And so you can see it's very glossy. I ended up putting clear glaze over the whole thing. And since I put clear glaze over the whole thing, I went ahead and did another test tile so that you could see the difference, what it looks like. That's the black, the top's got clear glaze, the bottom has nothing. And same with the purple. So you can really tell often there's a big difference in color variation when you glaze. Things get a lot brighter and obviously more shiny. But so you can also see I didn't do a very good job with my coverage of the purple. It's very brushstrokey, and also you can see I accidentally only ended up brushing my underglaze on in 2 different directions instead of 3, so you can really see those brush strokes. If I would have done the 3rd opposite direction, it wouldn't be so patchworky. So that's why you really want to make sure you do your brush strokes in different directions. And also one thing to really notice is how tight and crisp these lines are. They're exactly how I painted them. You can see that the underglaze did a pretty good job of covering over that black. Not perfect, but not bad. If you want to blend some colors together, I'm going to do it with these because I have more color options here. If you blend colors together, you want them to be analogous on the color wheel, meaning colors that touch each other on the rainbow, like red, orange, yellow would be good. This is yellow, green, blue, so those are analogous. And also, these are about the same value, which will make it a lot easier when you blend your colors. So I'm going to make sort of like a bubble, I guess, is what I'm going to paint. I don't ever like to waste. I usually just pour them in the lids. This is really thick. Underglazes can be thinned with water. As I'm blending the 2 together, you'll notice I didn't clean out my paintbrush. And on this edge here, I am kind of scrubbing down to that blue because it dries so fast, so that I'm giving myself more opportunity to really blend those colors together. And then the yellow, I did need to clean my brush out a little bit because I want it to be clean, nice and bright in the inside. Okay, so then I was sort of digging into that surface a little bit. So because I'm painting this bubble shape, it's going to be really, I can't really paint in different directions. I will do my best, but I just really can't. Actually, I did a pretty decent job of brushing in a different direction. You want to let it dry in between. I'm going to hit it with a hair dryer. So now I'm going to try and brush this on in one other different direction. I want to give it a little more depth. Actually, we're going to use this purple. So I might really mess it up now, but. So to give it some more depth, I'm just going to outline it a little bit. And I am sort of blending that in. I just got my paintbrush wet so that it blends more. So technically this is a 4th coat, but it's just a little bit, so I feel like it should be okay. Okay, So we'll glaze that and see what happens. So the thing that I like about Underglaze is what you see is close to what you're going to get. So when I think about Underglaze, I think about painting in the dark. It's a lot like painting in the dark. And so this isn't going to be the exact color blue, the periwinkle, lettuce alone, and dandelion. These will be a lot brighter once they're have the clear glaze on them, and once they're, oh, these don't have quick glaze. Once they're fired, even though these aren't Underglazes either, they're going to brighten up. This is going to brighten up too. So to me, it's sort of like painting in the dark. You kind of know what you're going to get, and they're fairly foolproof. And then you put them in the kiln, and then after they're fired, you open up the kiln, and the lights come on, and you can actually see what you were doing. Sometimes it's Christmas morning, and sometimes it's the day after Christmas. So sometimes it's a little bit of a letdown. So you can, this is kind of a fun little trick that you can do. Like the funny thing about Underglazes is because when they dry, they turn super duper pastel, and you actually start to really enjoy that pastel color. It's sort of funny, but they will brighten up, and so when you get it wet like that, that's close to what it's going to look like when it's fired. So. Okay, so I went ahead and fired that test tile as it is, and so this is what it looks like straight out of the kiln. And so you can see, you remember I didn't put any glaze on it, but because it is the Wonderglaze, it actually does have a shine to it. And what is also interesting is that purple underglaze I put on top of the Wonderglaze actually sort of, you can't really tell that it's a matte. It sort of bled in with all of the Wonderglaze, and it actually looks pretty good. So, you know, I didn't do the best job of blending my colors, as you can see, but it's not bad for being a little bit rusty. So it just goes to show you, just practice a little bit, and you should be able to get some good results. But don't expect good results right after the first time you make something. You got to practice a little bit. Another technique that you can do is basically sort of the watercolor technique. And so you can saturate your clay piece in water the same way you do with watercolor. If you've ever watercolor painted, usually the way it works is you tape your watercolor paper to a board and you saturate it with water, and then you paint over the top of it. So we're going to give that a try here. And we're going to do it with these darker colors so they're easier to see what's happening. You can paint like a landscape painting. This is Mountains in the Dark is what I'm titling this. So I want this outline to be a little bit darker. So I'm just going to go add a little bit more paint on there, a little bit more material, Underglaze to be specific. Doing this if I wanted to. Or if I wanted to maybe paint a flower. Okay, that's sort of like a cherry blossom maybe. And because I want it to have a little bit of definition, I'm going to go over the outside edge again, like I did with the mountains, just so it's a little bit darker there. And then if you wanted, you could, this is gonna be shiny. This part, this color. Which might be a cool contrast. Okay. So if I wanted, I could clear glaze over the top of this, or I could leave it so it's matte. Okay, so I went ahead and fired these other two test tiles, and so you can see I didn't put any clear glaze on them, so they are matte. And so definitely I would want to put a coat of polyurethane now on top of this since I've fired them, so that it'll protect the surface to prevent them from getting all dirty. And so also with this one, it would have been better if I did my second coat with a wider or a fatter paintbrush, so it wouldn't be quite so brush strokey. And so with the flower, if you recall, I used Wonderglaze. And oh, there you go. It's sort of picking up. My light's not great right now, but there we go. The inside pink part is shiny because those were the Wonderglaze parts, and then the rest of it is really matte. And so that's basically what you're going to get when you use those velvet underglaze and when you do sort of a watercolor technique. When it comes to painting pieces that are textured, the best way to go about that, in my opinion, is to layer your colors. And so if I just paint this all one solid color, it's just gonna look really two-dimensional. And so I want this to look much more three-dimensional. So I'm gonna use these colors again. Oops. So usually when I layer up my colors, I start with the light and then I gradually work to the dark. So I'll start yellow, green, blue. So it'll still kind of be a greenish blue color in the end, but it will have a lot more variation. The reason I like to use the light color first is because I feel like then it sort of glows a little bit. Looks like it's lit up from within. And because this is textured, there's all of this texture on this, you're really not going to see any of the brush strokes. So if you texture your piece, it makes your work in the glazing tons easier. Alright, that's my first coat. That looks pretty good. Make sure it's thoroughly dry. So if this were my choice, I would not be using these stroking coats to be glazing this piece with, because the stroking coats are shiny, and now my butterfly is going to be shiny, even if it's just going to be shiny because it's those stroking coats are more of a glaze. So actually, I would prefer to use the underglaze and not put a clear glaze over it so that it won't be shiny. If I fire this, it's going to look really stupid because it's going to be shiny and look like glass. It's going to be glassy. But at least this gives you an idea how to build up your colors. And so you can, you can do all of these techniques I'm doing here, you can do them with the commercial glazes as well. So that's my first coat. Now it's still not all the way dry. So now I'm gonna do my second coat. I should make sure it's dry more, but I don't wanna wait because I'm gonna wash this off anyway. Now I'm using a lighter touch because I don't want to disrupt or pull off any of that yellow underglaze that's underneath. Wonderglaze, I should say. So I'm just being careful and having a nice light touch. by itself is actually not bad. That's kind of a nice color. Reminds me of the Luna moths a little bit. Might be interesting to do another color of green on there, a different color of green, so it looks even more like those Luna moths. But we're just going for blue here. Okay, now I've got all 3 coats on of all my different colors. Now I'm going to add some depth to this piece so that you can really see the texture. And so I'm just going to use this black here. Actually, I don't need to do that. If I was doing this for real, I wouldn't use black. I would use maybe a dark blue or a dark purple, but I'm doing black here for filming purposes so that you can actually see what I'm doing and see what happens. So I'm thinning this out super duper thin so that it goes right into all of that texture. So it really highlights that texture. So you really want to make sure that your underglaze is super thin so then it just settles into the cracks, mostly. Actually, I'm going to use a little purple because I'm losing some of my color. So this part here, I can actually highlight. Since I did get a little too dark there, a sponge would be better to use here. But you can see I can really highlight some of those areas now. When you get it wet, it's kind of what it'll look like when you glaze it, when it gets fired. And then, of course, you can pick up some of your highlights. Okay, this is an example of a piece that I've used to demo before with 3 different colors, with the yellow, green, and then a tealish color. And then this is with no glaze over the top of it. So it's got this nice sort of matte finish and it's got really nice variation to it. Okay, so basically all these techniques I just showed you with Underglaze, you can do them all with commercial glaze. So feel free to do any of these techniques. So, you know, this one, I didn't do 3 coats because I want some sort of translucency going on. The thing that students get confused about with commercial glaze, and this is super important. So you can do the same thing, different patterns with all of these, with the commercial glaze. It won't be quite as sharp or as crisp, but the very, very most important thing to remember is to not put clear glaze on top of this. This is already a glaze, and so you do not put glaze on top of it. If you were to put glaze on top of this, then that's 6 coats of glaze, and you're gonna have crawling. So underglaze are called underglaze because you put glaze over the top of them. So I can put glaze over the top of this, I can put glaze over the top of this. This is Wonderglaze, which is more like a glaze, so you do not put glaze over the top of this. And this is straight up glaze. Do not put clear glaze on top of this.